The room was small and dim, its corners hidden in shadows that danced with the flickering light of an old kerosene lamp. The air smelled of rain-soaked mud and ground spices, thick with silence. Outside, the sky grumbled as the clouds wept softly onto the thatched roof, each drop landing like a secret. Inside, 6-year-old Adaora crouched beside the curtain, her fingers wrapped tightly around its faded edge. Her eyes, wide and full of wonder, peeked through a tiny gap, the only window she had to a world she barely knew. Footsteps crunched against the wet gravel outside. Laughter, faint but joyful, filtered into the room. She saw them, 2 women in bright wrappers and a man holding a gourd of palm wine. Their sandals splashed in puddles as they greeted her aunt with cheerful voices. Adaora's heart lifted for a moment, warmed by the sight of color and life. She smiled just barely. Then came the voice. Adaora. Cracked like lightning. Move away from that curtain. Before she could blink, the fabric was ripped from her grip. Mama Nkechi's hand was fast and firm. She pulled the curtain shut so hard it slapped against the wall, blocking out the sun, the guests, and the joy. I told you, Mama Nkechi hissed, her voice low but sharp. Don't let them see your face. Adaora's lips parted, but she said nothing. Her small fingers twitched at her sides. Do you want them to talk? Do you want them to point? You think they won't see it? She didn't know what they would see or why it mattered. She only knew she had done something wrong. Again. From beyond the door she heard them whispering. Her name muffled and quick. Then another voice, quieter, sadder. Poor child. Marked just like her mother. Born under the red moon, shame follows that blood. The words reached her ears, heavy and strange. She didn't understand what a curse was. Or shame. Or legacy. But she understood the way Mama Nkechi avoided her reflection in the mirror, the way she covered Adaora's cheek with thick scarves when someone came close. She backed away from the curtain and sat on the straw mat in the corner. She picked up her worn cloth doll and held it close to her chest. The laughter outside faded. Her world shrank again. From that day she stopped asking who came to visit. She stopped reaching for the curtain. And when someone knocked, she learned to disappear. The compound was a cage dressed in routine. Adaora, now 13, moved through it like clockwork, fetching water at dawn, sweeping the sandy courtyard before the sun rose too high, grinding pepper with quiet fingers while birds called to one another above the zinc rooftops. She knew the rhythm of every creaking door, every groan in the wooden floorboards, every sigh from Mama Nkechi's sewing machine. Her days were shaped not by time but by silence, the kind that lived in the walls, in the corners, in her own mouth. Mama Nkechi, her aunt and keeper, was a woman of sharp bones and sharper expectations. She was well respected in the village, the seamstress of choice for the wives of councilmen and the daughters of chiefs. Women traveled far for her blouses with perfect pleats and wrappers that fit like stories told to the skin. But behind the steady hum of her singer machine, Mama Nkechi carried an old wound, one she never spoke of, but that showed itself in the way she looked at Adaora. Adaora bore a mark from birth, a long jagged stain that stretched from her left cheek to the edge of her jawline, dark and uneven like spilled ink. Some said it was a sign of bad luck. Others claimed it was her mother's sin come back to haunt the living. Mama Nkechi never said what she believed. But every time someone came to the compound, a client, a friend, a visiting pastor, Adaora was told the same thing. Inside. Now. She would obey, slipping into the back room without a word, waiting in the silence. It was easier than asking why. Sometimes after the guests left and the measuring tapes were folded neatly away, Adaora would find scraps on the floor, bits of colorful fabric, stray buttons, or the best treasure of all, torn pages from fashion magazines. Mama Nkechi used them to line drawers or wrap patterns. But to Adaora they were sacred. Women in dazzling gowns, walking tall and laughing. Skin smooth, chins lifted. Adaora would press her fingers to the glossy paper and imagine. Not just wearing the clothes, but designing them. Creating stories in thread and silk. She kept the pages hidden beneath her sleeping mat, folding them like prayers. In an old exercise book, long emptied of schoolwork, she sketched. Crude at first, triangle torsos, stick arms, messy hemlines. But day by day, line by line, her designs sharpened. She would imagine a neckline while washing the dishes. A hem curve while scrubbing floors. A color palette while pounding yam. She filled page after page with her secret world, each dress named in her mind, Riverlight, Desert Queen, Whispers of Rain. At night, when the house was finally still and the kerosene lamp cast long shadows on the walls, Adaora would slide to the cracked mirror in the hallway. It leaned against the wall at an awkward angle, forgotten by everyone except her. She would wrap herself in old wrappers, tuck fabric beneath her arms, shape herself into the silhouettes she had drawn. She never wore makeup, only dreams. Her face, half-lit, would gaze back at her. The birthmark remained, bold and unhidden. But in the soft flicker of the lamp, even that seemed like part of the design. She would turn this way and that, twisting her thin frame into poise, imitating the confidence of the magazine women. She never spoke, not even to herself. But inside, she heard the imagined click of cameras, the applause of invisible crowds. It was the one place, in front of that mirror, where she wasn't hidden. Where the lines of her cheek didn't spell shame. They spelled survival. Maybe even beauty. In the morning, she'd tuck the sketchbook back under her mat, sweep the room, and tie her scarf tight over her head before the first knock at the compound gate. Back to silence. Back to shadows. But in the quiet corners of her mind, the runway never ended. The morning bell rang sharp and metallic through the air, and the students of Ikena Memorial School spilled into the red earth courtyard, uniforms fluttering like birds in the wind. Adaora walked at the edge of the crowd, her gaze low, books clutched tightly against her chest. Her uniform blouse was slightly faded, the hemline uneven where Mama Nkechi had hastily repaired it. She didn't mind. She liked things that had been patched. She felt patched herself, stitched together with scraps of hope and silence. Her teacher, Miss Chidima, was the first person outside the compound who seemed to truly see her. "You draw like the cloth has already been sewn," Miss Chidima said one day, gently turning the pages of Adaora's sketchbook during break time. She had caught her doodling a gown on the corner of her science notes. Instead of scolding her, the teacher had smiled, the kind of smile that didn't flinch at the mark on her cheek. "Don't hide this. The world needs beauty from every hand." Those words planted something inside Adaora, not quite confidence but the beginnings of it. Still, school was no refuge from cruelty. The other children didn't understand quietness that wasn't fear, or bold eyes on a scarred face. They called her names: Ghost Cheek, Moon Face, Mask Face. Some whispered curses when she passed as if her birthmark might jump onto them. Boys made cruel jokes. Girls giggled behind their palms. But one didn't. Her name was Somi. She had thick, coily hair and a voice that didn't know how to be small. One afternoon during break, a boy snatched Adaora's sketchbook and held it high. "What's this? Cloth for ghosts? Maybe she's drawing her next disguise." Adaora froze, heart hammering. She didn't fight. She never did. But Somi did. She stepped forward, hands on her hips. "Give it back," she said. No yelling. Just firm. The boy laughed. "What? You like drawings from a cursed girl?" "I like talent," Somi said. "And you clearly don't know what that looks like." The other kids stared, stunned. The boy dropped the book and stalked off. From that day on, Somi sat next to Adaora in class. They shared Gary during break and whispered dreams over homework pages. Somi wanted to be a journalist. "I'll write your name in magazines one day," she said. "You'll be the one designing all the clothes." When the school announced a fashion sketch contest, Adaora's fingers itched. The prize was small, a set of art pencils and a notebook, but the idea of her work being seen filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She told no one. Not even Somi. She entered under the name Amaka, a name she had always liked. It meant beautiful. It felt dangerous to use it. Daring. Like trying on someone else's skin, someone who didn't have to hide. She stayed up late perfecting the gown, a flowing dress inspired by the hibiscus flower, with sharp red lines at the collar like petals curling into a secret. She folded it carefully, submitted it quietly, and waited. A week later, the announcement came during morning assembly. The headmaster stood beneath the flagpole, holding up the winning drawing. "We have a very talented designer in our midst," he said. "Amaka, wherever you are, come forward." The students clapped. Somi nudged Adaora playfully. "It looks like yours." But Adaora didn't move. The next day she was called into the staff office. The headmaster sat stiffly behind his desk, the drawing laid out like evidence. Miss Chidima stood beside him, arms crossed tightly. "We've discovered who submitted this," the headmaster said, not looking at Adaora. "And unfortunately, since false names were not permitted, the entry is disqualified." Miss Chidima's eyes flashed with something like anger, but she said nothing. Adaora nodded. She didn't ask questions. She just took her drawing back and walked out, the prize already handed to someone else. The walk home was long, the paper folded under her arm, her heart heavier than usual. The tears came quietly, one by one, not dramatic, just steady, like the drizzle that had begun to fall from the sky. When she reached home, Mama Nkechi saw the smudged face, the soaked paper. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer comfort. She took the drawing from Adaora's hand, looked at it once, then tossed it into the kitchen fire without a word. Adaora stood there watching it curl and blacken. The red hibiscus petals turned to smoke. That night, she sat alone on the mat, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face glowing faintly in the cracked mirror's reflection. Her birthmark looked darker in the moonlight, more defiant. She whispered it softly, like a spell, like a secret she wasn't sure she was allowed to believe. One day they'll see me. The air in the classroom shifted the day Miss Zara walked in. She wasn't like the other teachers. She wore high heels that clicked confidently on the concrete floor, and her braids were pulled into a crown on her head, wrapped with ankara that matched her earrings. The students whispered about her like she was magic, a woman who had worked in Lagos in fashion in studios that made clothes for celebrities. Rumor had it she once assisted at Lagos Fashion Week. To Adaora, she looked like someone who had stepped out of her torn magazine pages and into real life. Miss Zara introduced herself with a smile that seemed to shine past every student and land directly on Adaora. "Call me Miss Zara," she said. "Not Teacher Zara. Not Auntie. Just Zara. I'm here to help you become more of who you already are." Adaora blinked. Later that week, during a free period, Miss Zara passed by Adaora's desk and saw her sketching. Not hiding, not exactly. But not offering either. The teacher leaned down, looked over her shoulder, and nodded with deep, quiet approval. "You've got a good eye," she said. "Great lines. You see shape in the way a tailor sees it, as movement, not just cloth." Adaora's breath caught. Miss Zara didn't just compliment her. She gave her access to old issues of fashion magazines she no longer needed, to leftover fabric samples, to the kind of stories no one else shared. How fashion wasn't just a thing for models or rich women but a language. How stitches could speak when words weren't allowed. How even the girl no one looked at could dress the world. So Adaora began, slowly, secretly, helping some of the girls at school with their festival outfits. Somi, of course, was first. "My mama will sew it," Somi whispered, "but she's clueless about style. I want that off-shoulder thing you drew." In small, quiet ways, Adaora started giving her ideas form. She sketched details on paper scraps, offered suggestions in hushed tones during break. A dart here, a ribbon there. Most of her classmates never knew the full extent of her involvement, only that their dresses turned out beautiful, and somehow newer than anything the local tailors produced. But talent doesn't stay hidden forever. One evening, while Adaora was away fetching water, Mama Nkechi found the stack of drawings stuffed between old school books. Designs, fabric scraps, even a small measuring tape Miss Zara had given her. When Adaora returned, she found her sketches scattered on the floor like torn leaves, Mama Nkechi standing over them, eyes hard and mouth set. "You think fashion will feed you?" her aunt barked, holding up a ripped drawing. "You think people will wear clothes made by a girl they won't even look at?" Adaora didn't answer. She didn't cry either. She just knelt slowly, picking up the pieces, not of the paper but of herself. That night, the silence between them was sharp, filled with unspoken truths. Mama Nkechi never spoke about Adaora's mother, or what truly drove her shame. But sometimes in her anger, it leaked out. The bitterness, the fear, the bone-deep belief that dreams were for the beautiful, not for girls with scars. But Adaora had stopped believing her. Slowly and without permission. From that night on she began to sew. At first it was just stitches in the dark, fixing small rips on her own clothes with leftover thread. Then came the scraps Miss Zara gave her, rejects from other students, cuttings too small to be useful. But Adaora made use of everything. She turned a faded wrapper into the body of a dress. She used broken zippers to learn repair. With a bent needle and shaking fingers, she started building something the world had told her wasn't hers. She worked at night, with only the soft glow of the moon through the window and the quiet rhythm of her breath to keep her company. She measured, pinned, and stitched slowly. She made mistakes, unpicked them, started again. Her fingers bled sometimes, but she never stopped. It took her 5 months. 5 months of cutting by candlelight, of sewing in silence, of hiding her progress beneath her bed every morning before sunrise. When she was 15, Adaora finished her first complete dress. It wasn't perfect. The seams were uneven, the hem a little jagged. But it was hers, all hers. A knee-length shift made of patched fabrics in bold colors: sunflower yellow, deep plum, olive green. She had sewn her initials into the lining with blue thread, AO. She folded the dress carefully, wrapped it in an old pillowcase and tucked it beneath her mat, her secret masterpiece. No one knew about it. Not Mama and Ketchy. Not even Somi. But it didn't matter. Because when Adaora pressed the fabric to her chest, felt the weight of what she had created, she realized something powerful. The world might not look at her now. But one day they would. The new Yam festival came with a buzz that clung to the village like morning mist. The drums echoed from compound to compound, children laughed barefoot in dusted fields, and women paraded in bright wrappers, their heads crowned with gelly and gold earrings that caught the sun. Adaora had no intention of going. She never did. Festivals were for the scene, and she had been raised in the shadows. But Somi wouldn't let her stay behind this time. Come na, Somi pleaded, grabbing her wrist. You made that dress. It deserves light. And so do you. Adaora hesitated. Her dress, had never left the safety of her room. It was still folded carefully under her mat like a secret waiting for permission. And she had never once stepped outside with her birthmark uncovered, or her heart fully exposed. But something shifted that morning. She wore the dress. She tied a bold purple gelly around her head, letting the fabric drape just enough to shade the left side of her face, where the dark birthmark spread from her cheek to just beneath her eye. She used Somi's makeup, a bright red lipstick, a dash of shimmer on her eyelids, to complete the look. In the cracked mirror she didn't recognize herself. She looked like a woman who could take up space. The festival was electric. There was yam pounding, masquerades and dancers in raffia skirts. Adaora tried to stay near the edges, but music has a way of calling out even the quietest spirit. When the drumming intensified, Somi grabbed her hand and pulled her into the circle of dancers. At first, Adaora moved stiffly, uncertain, eyes scanning for disapproval. But then the rhythm found her feet. Her hands, her waist, the earth, and she danced, laughing, twirling, forgetting. She didn't notice the man with the camera. He was a photographer, a tourist, Lagos-based, visiting with a small group of bloggers and cultural writers. He'd come to write about yam rituals and village crafts. But when he saw Adaora, that moment of color, movement, and mystery, he lifted his lens and clicked. The flash didn't register. Adaora didn't even know he was there. A week later, that single photo appeared in a Lagos fashion blog titled, "The Mystery Queen of Udi Festival." It was an arresting image. Adaora mid-twirl, the skirt of her handmade dress fanned out like a painted sunburst. Her smile wide, her eyes alive. The gelly wrapped around her head like royalty. Her birthmark, partly covered, only added to the enigma. The post went viral. Fashion enthusiasts flooded the comments. Who is she? Does anyone know this girl? That dress, where is it from? Photographers speculated, stylists reposted. Someone called her, the next face of African beauty. Another dubbed her, the hidden flame. But back in the village, Adaora knew nothing. Until Somi came running one afternoon, breathless, a printout of the blog post in her hands. "You're famous," she shouted. Adaora's fingers trembled as she held the image. She barely recognized herself. But it was her, not an illusion. Not someone pretending to be bold. Somi beamed. "They're calling you a queen." But Mama Nkechi was not smiling. Later that evening, when Adaora returned home, her aunt stood in the doorway holding the printout. Her face was a storm. "You disobeyed me," she said coldly. "You embarrassed this house." "Mama," Adaora began, voice tight. The blow came quickly. "You let strangers see your face. Your cursed face." The dress was torn from her body. The gelly was ripped away. The photo was crumpled in her aunt's fist. But Adaora didn't cry. Not that night. Instead, as the stars blinked silently above the rooftop, she sat in her room, wrapped in a faded wrapper, and stared at the torn picture Somi had reprinted for her. They saw her. The world saw her. And for the first time they didn't flinch. They didn't look away. They didn't whisper about curses or shame. They asked, "Who is she?" That question became a fire in her chest. If no one would name her. If her aunt would only name her disgrace. If the village would only call her hidden. Then she would name herself. She took her notebook, the one she once filled with secret sketches, and wrote across the cover. Adaora Kachi, fashion. Fire. Face. She underlined it once. Twice. The name was hers. And she wasn't hiding it anymore. The name came to her one evening as the lantern flickered low and the village slept under a cloak of stillness. Nora. Not Adaora the hidden. Not Mask Face, or that girl with the mark. Just Nora, simple, clean, untouched by gossip or shame. She told no one except Somi. It sounds like someone they'll respect, Somi said with a grin, eyes sparkling as she tapped on her old phone. Now let's make them see what Nora can do. With Somi's help, Adaora began submitting her designs to small fashion pages on Instagram. Pages that celebrated African streetwear, indie designers and anonymous style sketches. They posted fan submissions daily, especially ones with originality. Somi would photograph Adaora's drawings, upload them under a new account they created together, @NoraCreates, and send them off. The designs caught eyes almost instantly. A bold Ankara jumpsuit with asymmetrical cuts. A ruffled skirt made from recycled wrappers. A high-collar blouse inspired by village head wraps. And always signed Nora E. Soon people began to notice. A comment here, a repost there. One stylist messaged asking, "Are you available for commissions?" Another asked if Nora had a face reveal. Somi and Adaora would laugh under their breath. "No face," Adaora would whisper. "Just fire." But it was Miss Zara who saw beyond the sketches. She had noticed the familiar strokes, the confident hands, the subtle village details sewn into every curve of cloth. "You made these, didn't you?" she asked one day after class, holding a printout of the Nora E. page. Adaora hesitated, heart thudding. Then she nodded. Miss Zara smiled. "I knew it. You've got a gift, girl. And I know just the place that can help it grow." She handed Adaora a brochure. Elon Institute of Fashion, Lagos. A prestigious, cutthroat fashion school known for producing the nation's top designers. Beside the name was a banner, "Scholarship Program Open, Apply with Design Portfolio." Adaora stared at the pages for hours that night. The campus photos, the models, the city lights. She saw another world, glittering and terrifying. Could she belong there? For 2 weeks, she poured everything she had into the application. She redesigned older pieces, sewed 3 new looks using scrap cloth and leftover thread, and labeled each one with the crisp moniker, Nora E. Her portfolio was mailed through a cousin of Somi's who worked at the town post office. Adaora kissed the envelope before handing it over, her palms sweaty with fear and hope. Then silence. For weeks she waited. She checked the post every morning. Every knock on the door made her stomach twist. Until one afternoon, Miss Zara came running down the path with a letter in her hand. Her eyes were wide. Her mouth open. "They picked you." Adaora froze. "You got the scholarship, Adaora. Full. All expenses paid. They want you in Lagos." The paper trembled in her hands as she read it over and over again. Her breath caught. Her name, well, Nora E., had made it to Lagos. She'd won. That night, the stars felt closer than they'd ever been. But reality returned with her aunt's voice. "Lagos." Mama Nkechi said when Adaora gathered the courage to tell her. "You?" "Yes. Full scholarship. To study fashion." Mama Nkechi chuckled bitterly. "They'll laugh in your face. Do they know what you look like? Do they know who you are? You think that Mark won't follow you there?" Adaora said nothing. She just stared back, calm, resolute. Her silence this time was not surrender. It was armor. The next morning she packed a single bag. A few pairs of clothes, a folder of sketches, a thumb drive with digital designs Somi helped her scan, and a worn notebook that held her dreams. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. Miss Zara drove her to the station. Somi came along, clutching a small plastic bag filled with snacks, soap, and a Lucky Charm bracelet. At the terminal, Adaora turned back only once. Her village, her shadows, stood behind her. Ahead was the noise of the city, the unknown, the place where Nora would rise. "I won't return the same," she whispered. As the bus pulled away, the sun caught her reflection in the window. For the first time she didn't look away. Lagos was everything Adaora had imagined, and everything she hadn't. The noise was constant, like the city never breathed in, only exhaled heat and motion. Cars honked in chaos, vendors shouted at crossroads, neon lights buzzed even at midnight. Her campus at Elon Institute was sleek and metallic, a world away from her aunt's clay-walled compound. Adaora arrived carrying little more than fabric and fire. But in her first week, that fire almost went out. She was assigned to a shared dorm room with a girl named Tolu, a second-year student with honey-colored braids, expensive perfume, and a sharp tongue. Tolu barely looked at Adaora when she spoke. "Where's your accent from?" "Bush girl," she said one night, laughing into her phone. Adaora slept facing the wall that evening, her blanket pulled to her chin, gripping her sketches like protection. At orientation she felt lost in the crowd. Other students wore branded sneakers and fluent slang. They discussed overseas fashion trends, name-dropped Parisian designers, and swapped tips about influencer marketing. Adaora listened, nodded when needed, and swallowed her questions like stones. Still, the sewing rooms were open late. And that was where she healed. In the quiet hum of the machines and the scent of fabric glue and starch, she came alive. She stitched without hesitation. She worked with instinct and memory, recreating textures she knew from home, layering stories into sleeves and stitching grief into seams. Her pieces began to draw attention. A professor named Madame Chitty started leaving her notes. "This hem is genius. You see fabric like a sculptor sees marble." She never stopped calling herself Nora in class, even on her name tag. But at night, she was Adaora again, thinking of the village, of Somi's laughter, of Mama Nkechi's hissed words. People won't wear clothes made by a girl they won't look at. And then came the opportunity. The school announced its first student fashion showcase of the semester. Wear your voice. Each student was to design a piece that told their story. Adaora panicked at first. What would she say? What could she wear that held her silence, her rage, her dreams? Then she remembered the curtain. That dusty, faded floral fabric that had kept her hidden. The one her aunt pulled shut every time someone came. She hunted down something like it in Lagos Island Market. Not the same but close. A dusty rose print with oversized florals and gold threads woven through it. She worked for days. Sketched, ripped, stitched, cried. She created a sleeveless gown with wide, flowing panels that mimicked that curtain. One side trailed like a cape. Across the bodice she embroidered the words, "They tried to hide me." The night of the show, the auditorium buzzed with students, faculty, stylists, and Lagos bloggers. There were camera flashes, laughter, nerves. Backstage, Toulouse scoffed when she saw Adaora in her piece. "You're wearing it yourself? That's brave." But Adaora wasn't afraid. Not tonight. She had made one final change. She took off her head wrap. For the first time in public, Adaora walked out, not as Nora, the faceless designer, not as the girl who only showed her eyes. She walked out as herself, birthmark uncovered, head held high. Gasps fluttered across the room like wind in dry leaves. Then came silence. Then clapping. Not loud at first, but growing, rising. Someone in the front row stood. A photographer's flash popped. Then another. By the time Adaora reached the end of the runway, the applause was a wave. She turned, met their gaze, and let them see everything. The birthmark. The story. The girl who once lived behind a curtain now walked through it like a queen. The next morning she woke to her name, Nora, blazing across multiple blog headlines. The face of fearless fashion. Nora E. bold, brilliant, beautiful. One read, "Who is this girl rewriting the runway?" Toulouse didn't speak to her that day. But Madame Chitty winked at her and said, "You didn't just wear your voice, child. You shouted." That evening Adaora called Somi. "I showed them," she whispered. And Somi on the other end was already crying. The sun was gentler now, not like the harsh glare Adaora remembered from her childhood in the village. Or maybe she had changed, not the sun. In Lagos, her days had become a whirlwind of studio fittings, interviews, and photo shoots. But it wasn't just the pace that was dizzying, it was the visibility. Adaora's face, the one her aunt had hidden from the world, now looked back at her from newsstands, billboards, and television screens. The first time she saw herself on the cover of Glow Africa, she froze. Not just because her birthmark was boldly unedited, but because beside her face were the words, "Unseen no more, Nora E. is changing beauty forever." It started with one magazine, then 3, then 10. Within 6 months she had become the conversation. Not just in fashion circles but in culture columns, talk shows, academic essays. Everyone was talking about the girl with the birthmark who didn't hide. Her fashion line, Unseen Beauty, became a statement brand. She hired models with vitiligo, burn scars, limb differences, alopecia. Women who had never before been offered a place in glossy spreads now graced her runways. Each piece in the collection bore messages stitched inside the lining. You are not invisible. You are not a mistake. You are not alone. The pieces sold out within hours of launch. Adaora didn't handle the chaos alone. Somi, ever loyal, had become her business manager. Fierce, witty, and brilliant with logistics. She managed budgets, interviews, licensing deals. Miss Zara, now retired from teaching, joined the team as a design consultant. Her years of quiet encouragement had not gone to waste. Your story stitched itself into the world, Miss Zara told her during one late night in the studio. Now let it keep blooming. And it did. But one letter stopped her in her tracks. A formal invitation sealed with the village council's stamp. They were hosting a youth event to honor, those who carried the name of the village into the world. Adaora was invited as a guest of honor. She hadn't been home in almost 4 years. There was a pause in her breath as the memory of the curtain, the cracked mirror, and Mama Nkechi's scorn swelled inside her. She said yes. When she arrived, the village was different, or perhaps they looked at her differently now. Banners fluttered in the breeze. Little girls in bright Ankara dresses waved shyly as her car pulled in. One held a handmade sign that read, "I want to be unseen too." The girl's mother quickly corrected it with a pen, "Seen." At the school compound where the event was held, children lined up to greet her. Many wore dresses clearly inspired by her designs. Uneven hemlines, creative stitching, bold colors. Adaora smiled at each of them, touching their shoulders, saying, "You look like art." Somi, walking beside her, whispered, "You've started a wildfire." The headmaster, who once revoked her prize, shook her hand with too much enthusiasm. "You've made us proud," he said, avoiding her eyes. She nodded politely. And then, at the far edge of the crowd, she saw the house. Her old home. The clay walls had been repainted. The curtain had been replaced. But Mama Nkechi stood at the window just as she used to. Watching. Silent. She hadn't come to the event. She hadn't sent word. But she was there. Watching. Adaora felt no anger rise. No bitterness, no need to prove. She walked toward the house with the slow, sure steps of a woman who owed no one her worth. Mama Nkechi didn't open the door. But as Adaora approached the window, they locked eyes through the screen. No tears. No words. Just the wind and the weight of everything unsaid. Adaora stopped, stood tall, and said quietly, loud enough for Mama Nkechi to hear, "You hid me, but now I shine in the open." Then she turned away. Children called her name. Girls laughed and ran toward her with folded sketches to show. Somewhere in the crowd, a young girl with a birthmark just like hers beamed up at her and said, "They say I look like you." Adaora knelt, touched the girl's cheek gently and smiled. "No," she said. "You look like yourself. And that's more than enough." The village had once tried to cover her in shame. But now she had stitched herself a new name, a new story, and every thread shimmered in the light. Her aunt watched from the shadows. But Adaora? Adaora belonged to the sun now. The village market buzzed with the color and chaos of a typical Saturday. Women bartered over yams and tomatoes. Children chased each other through the dust, and the scent of grilled plantains drifted in the warm air. Among the stalls, a young girl no older than 6 tugged at her mother's wrapper. "Mama," she said, pointing to the glossy magazine lying among sweets and chewing gum on the vendor's table, "why is her face like that?" The cover showed a tall, regal woman, arms folded, wrapped in flowing ivory fabric that shimmered under soft lighting. Her cheek bore the signature birthmark, now as recognizable as any logo. Her eyes were steady, unashamed. The girl's mother knelt beside her, smoothing her daughter's hair gently. "That is her face because it is her truth," she said softly. And her truth made the world listen. The girl blinked, absorbing the words like sunlight. "Is she a queen?" "Something greater," the woman said, smiling. "She is Adaora." At the Lagos Institute of Design and Identity, applause echoed through the glass auditorium. The keynote speaker stood behind the podium in a sleek, hand-stitched jumpsuit, minimalist but striking. On the back of her shoulder, just visible beneath the folds, was her signature, a jagged thread embroidered in silver like a lightning bolt. Adaora, designer, icon, storyteller. The room was full of young designers, models, and journalists. Cameras flashed. Pens scribbled. She took a breath and began. "I was born in a village where curtains meant shame. Where I learned to measure silence by how long I was kept hidden. My aunt told me, 'Don't let them see your face.' And so I didn't, not for a long time. But when I did, the world didn't break. It listened." She paused, letting the words settle. "Some of us were born behind curtains," she continued. "But we stepped out, and became the spotlight. We stitched ourselves into the stories we weren't allowed to tell." The applause returned, louder this time. Outside the institute, another story was unfolding. Adaora's studio was bathed in late afternoon gold. Rolls of fabric leaned against the walls, wax prints, silks, recycled denim, soft lace. Sketches were pinned everywhere, layered like feathers on a wing. Adaora sat at her work table, threading a needle with steady hands. A melody played softly from a nearby radio, something jazzy with an Igbo twist. The door opened and a girl stepped in, maybe 15, shoulders hunched slightly, a scar running down her temple to her jaw. Her eyes flicked to Adaora's face, then down to her own feet. "Come in," Adora said, setting the needle down and smiling. The girl hesitated. Miss Nora, I mean? Adora, she corrected gently. I don't know if I belong here. Adora stood slowly, walked over, and lifted the girl's chin with a soft hand. Your scar doesn't scare me. The girl blinked, unsure if it was a compliment, a challenge, or something sacred. You're not hiding anymore, Adora said. And that means you already belong. The girl's eyes welled up. Adora reached for a bolt of soft indigo cloth and draped it around her shoulders like a shawl. Let's begin, she said. In a village that once whispered about her in shadows, her name now came with pride. In a city that once questioned if she belonged, she became a symbol of what belonging could look like. Adora's name didn't just sit on magazines anymore. It sat in the margins of young girls' notebooks, etched into classroom walls, scribbled in the corners of sewing tables. She was no longer the girl hidden like shame. She was the woman who rose like style.